This week, we welcome back Harry Sverdlove, the founder and CTO of Edgewise, and Dan Perkins, principal product manager at Zscaler, talk about protecting critical infrastructure and workloads in hybrid clouds. In our second segment, it's the security news. New Microsoft Defender ATP capabilities block malicious behaviors. Voice phishers are targeting corporate VPNs. IBM finds a vulnerability in IoT chips that are present in billions of devices. Marriott faces London lawsuit over vast data breach. U.S. firm accused of secretly installing location tracking SDK in mobile apps. And disrupting a power grid with cheap equipment hidden in a coffee cup. In our final segment, we air two pre-recorded interviews from Security Weekly's Virtual Hacker Summer Camp. Corey Thune, co-founder of Gravwell, and Daryl Hyland, the principal security researcher for IoT at Rapid7. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. NetSparker, the developers of a comprehensive automated web security platform that includes web vulnerability scanning, assessment, and management. NetSparker's desktop and cloud-based security solutions employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities and provides a proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at securityweekly.com/NetSparker. Are you an enterprise dissatisfied with overpriced analytics software that can't keep up with modern data? If so, then Gravwell is the solution for you. Gravwell is an unstructured data analytics platform for enterprises who demand total data visibility across their network. Gravwell lets your security team go beyond the SIM and fuse data sources to correlate and answer questions you didn't know needed to be asked. Go to gravwell.io/securityweekly for an unlimited data trial and gain uncompromising visibility today.
A man, a plan, that doesn't work at all. He's straight back from touring his new album, straight out of Samaria. He's a master of the gangsta pan flute. It's Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 663, being recorded on August 20th, 2020, here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. To my left, the doctor is in the house, Dr. Doug White. Welcome.
Hello.
It's wonderful to have you. Have someone to share some martinis with.
I know. I missed a couple.
Cheers. We can't touch glasses.
Oh,
social
God,
distancing.
no. It's pure alcohol. It won't get infected. I mean, you're protected. That's what they said. The CDC said that. They said drink
alcohol
martinis, you'll be fine. Just keep alcohol in your mouth at all times. You'll be fine.
I think I read a meme about that alcohol.
Soak your mask in alcohol.
Yeah. On the lines remotely, Mr. Lee Neely is here with us. That is a really big glass of wine, my friend.
Thank you very much. This thing holds about a half a bottle.
Yeah, it's like a Paul Security Weekly sized wine glass.
Yes, it works perfectly. When I'm coupling it with a little goat cheese with truffle in it and a couple of different chorizos from Spain to go make the evening go well.
Looking forward. You've got some good taste there. You're way more refined and sophisticated than we are.
Yeah. We were eating refried beans and nacho cheese or something. I don't know.
Vodka with some olive juice. That's really... Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us. Tyler, welcome.
Pan flutes and martini glasses and goat cheese.
And like evil curly braces, dude. We need to petition to change the curly brace to the evil curly brace.
Yeah, it has to be.
I want all my code to have evil curly braces.
I feel like all my dictionaries in Python are evil.
C++ will make a comeback if you can get evil curly braces.
Right? Yeah, there was a lot of curly braces in C++ too.
That's all there is in C++.
There's some in Python, dictionaries.
Yeah, but not as many, yeah.
Is that like where'd you get that shirt, Tyler? I'm curious.
So that's Dark Side Ops.
Okay.
Silent cool, awesome class.
Awesome. Yeah. A quick announcement before we get started. Join our mailing list for information about our webcast, virtual training announcements, and you will receive an invite to our Discord server. Actually, when you visit securityweekly.com/subscribe, it's in phase 1 of the revamping of our subscribe page. So if you go there, you can join our mailing list, which we've renamed back to our Security Weekly Insider mailing list. You can join our Discord server where there's great stuff happening. I was talking about my conversion from Python 2 to 3 in our Discord server this week.
That's
there. And then you can subscribe to all of our shows. securityweekly.com/subscribe. No stranger to the show, Harry Sverdlove is Edgewise's Chief Technology Officer, was previously CTO of Carbon Black, and wrote macros in, what was the...
Lotus 123.
Lotus 123. We talked about so many different pieces of software pre-show. Lotus 123, macro programming subject matter expert. Harry, welcome.
Thank you. I got to correct you, actually, since last time I was here. Yes, I am the CTO and co-founder of Edgewise, but I'm actually, since a week after I was last on, we were acquired by Zscaler.
That's
so
right.
I'm the chief technologist for Zscaler now.
Fantastic. Dan is here. Congratulations on that, by the way, Harry. And we saw the announcement, and official titles are changing. It's wonderful. Dan is with us. He's the product manager focused on building the Zscaler workload protection. I don't know why your last name wasn't in the teleprompter. Burgundy reads what's on the teleprompter. Dan Perkins is here with us. He is into the best microsegmentation control on the market. His background is in virtualization, system storage, and cybersecurity. To learn more about Edgewise, visit securityweekly.com/Edgewise. Dan, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I apologize for butchering your introduction there.
Oh, no worries. Heck, I may have even left my last name out of that form. I don't know.
There you go. One thing that we wanted to hit on first, that I actually wanted to hit on when I was reading the description for this, was Active Directory. We haven't talked recently about Active Directory compromises. We actually touched on it briefly in comparing different directory services. And I asked John Strand, who runs a world-class pen test team, I'm like, so John, if it's not Active Directory, is it better? Is the grass greener on the other side from security? He's like, no, they're all pretty much really horrible in terms of security. So I'll turn it over to Harry and Dan to talk about and kind of set the stage for Active Directory compromises and how we deal with those.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, thanks again for having me on. If I had known that this was episode 663, I would have asked to be pushed 3 episodes forward.
Right.
I try to be on all the Fibonacci number episodes, but I've only been on a couple of them so far.
So whether it's Active Directory or any of the other authentication services, the problem and the challenge is you still need to have, and there are central authentication services and authorization services that need to be connected to everything in your network, including your remote workers, including your remote users. And especially in hybrid cloud environments, that gets very complicated. But the real challenge is you have to open up a lot of permissiveness in most, certainly if you're using traditional security, just to allow, whether it's Active Directory or some other service, to be able to do its job, to authenticate computers, services, users. And so it's no surprise that it is very commonly, we all hear it referred to as, if you attack Active Directory, you've attacked the keys to the kingdom. If you can compromise an Active Directory server, an LDAP server, or one of those services, you literally can get access to inventory for everything in the network, everything in the environment, has higher privilege. And that's why these systems are so critical. Once they're compromised, it's game over. You basically walk free throughout the network. And because they're so interconnected and they require so many different services to communicate, I was looking beforehand on the list of traditional firewall rules that are needed just to allow Active Directory to work. And this is without a hybrid environment. And it's dozens and dozens of different ports and different rules that are allowed. You end up creating this ridiculously permissive environment, and it's really, really hard to secure with traditional network security. It's really hard to secure. So what we end up finding is in most environments, even if you have firewalls and you have other sort of traditional network security involved, you're going to allow any to any on certain ports or certain things just to allow Active Directory to work. And the same can be true, by the way, for other critical services like backup services, vulnerability scanning services. Those tend to be add-ons. So, you may or may not have those, but with Active Directory, almost everybody has something or some replacement thereof.
It's interesting, Harry.
Go ahead.
If you think about a directory service, Active Directory obviously being the most popular, right? The job of a directory service is to disseminate information about the environment, right? I mean, at some level, that's really what I see a lot of pen testers and attackers kind of preying on. Active Directory obviously being the most popular, right, is just the fact that the name directory service tells me it's kind of like a phone book, but it goes even deeper than that, right? It's the job of it to describe all of the users and services and resources and file shares and printers and all of that, so you can find things as a user. In the essence, in its very nature of being a directory service, it's ripe for attack. No matter how much you lock it down, it still has to tell people that, hey, there's a printer on the network or a file share, right?
Exactly. It is exactly right. And that's, we normally think of if you've ever participated in a red teaming exercise, it's really very interesting because we always think, well, the attacker knows our environment exactly as well as we do. Well, they don't. It's just a black box to them until they get in. Mm-hmm. Once they attack something like a directory service, then the answer is they actually do. Now they do know your environment. They do know exactly where your critical servers are, where your systems are, and as you said, even where your printers are. And it gives an attacker the visibility that we think they have, but they don't have. But they do have it once they compromise Active Directory, and then it gives them the routes to how to get to those different services. So it really is, it is an apt metaphor when people call it the keys to the kingdom. I like the phone book metaphor as well. It's a phone book. It's a Google map. I don't know, you could choose a couple of different metaphors, right. But it's it's definitely, it's critical infrastructure is the bottom line. And if it's compromised, you're pretty much game over. You pretty much have, as an attacker now, you have access to every resource that an IT administrator has, that anybody has inside the network. And that's why it's so important to be able to monitor what is going in and out of Active Directory, who are making requests, and to be able to stop and limit communications to Active Directory.
Right. Tyler, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, I'm curious what from your standpoint, are you seeing a more complex and more open Active Directory services based on the hybrid kind of approach everybody's moving to, with like Azure Active Directory moving into the cloud, everybody trying to dump at least some form of their Active Directory in there? Do you see that as being a bigger problem, or do you see that as helping solve some of the problems internally?
Well, from a security perspective, I see it as a bigger problem. From a management perspective, I see it certainly solves certain problems, and it offloads certainly some of the hardware resourcing and connectivity that's required. But it doesn't change the security or, if you will, the sensitivity of those services. And in fact, it does make it somewhat complex because you have the way cloud services authenticate and identify services is very different depending on the cloud environment than the way an on-premise network or physical network will do so. And so it's a learning curve, I think, for a lot of IT administration.
Yeah, I was going to ask from the authentication standpoint, like obviously as attackers, we're typically going after things like, LDAP or say some NetBIOS or abusing a bunch of the protocols that are typically within inside of a traditional network. With the hybrid stuff, you're running into different authentication methods in different cloud environments, and the things that we're attacking is becoming different. Does the kind of carryover to your new company and like the microsegmentation play into that as far as how those protocols are both attacked and defended?
Well, actually, so this is where, and sort of the key or the essence of what the way Edgewise, now Zscaler, has been, our workload protection platform is based, which is microsegmentation is often thought of as physically small, sort of, I want to draw a circle around something small, but if you don't think of it as physical addresses and physical machines, but rather as identity. So it's the services that communicate, for example, to do directory services or to do authentication. It can span a physical environment to a cloud environment. There's no rule that says a microsegment, sort of as we use that term, or even a segment has to be physically in a given physical topology or physical network. It's that way because of traditional network security, because we rely traditionally on addresses. And of course, the address space changes quite often when you switch to a hybrid or a cloud environment. But if you deal with it, in fact, it's actually that type of move makes our approach, which is based off of software identity, much more practical. And you can imagine, well, you can segment, a directory service, even if it spans, it's going to an Amazon cloud service down to a hardware, physical or virtual environment over across to Azure, take your pick. It's still, you can create a micro segment, to use sort of the legacy terminology. You can create a protected segment around those services, as long as you stop looking at it as a set of physical addresses.
So is that because of agent based, or how are you accomplishing that?
So that's because of, it all boils down to, I think when we've talked about this on the show before, but it boils down to using identity. Now, we use an agent to establish identity, because how do you determine identity? Identity of software, identity of user, identity of system that's communicating. But if what you want to segment is the identity of the things that are involved in the discussion of directory services, in the discussion of authentication. It's just like if you're doing any other security. If you want to secure a person, you could secure their home as long as they're sitting in their home. But what if they're walking around? You've got to create a security sort of, if you will, bubble around them wherever they go. And if they're going from home to work, or they're going from home to the coffee shop, and in our sort of metaphor, let's say the coffee shop is the hybrid environment, and work is the physical environment, and home is an at-home environment. You still want to secure the person that is doing, or the people that are involved in that communication. That identity doesn't change regardless of where I'm accessing the service. The identity of whether it's an LSAS service, whether it's a DNS service, whatever the services are, or the system services are that are requesting, in all environments, they're all requesting access to directory services. They all need it just to do their job. And their identity doesn't change based on where they're located.
And in this,
that identity, that identity is also, you have the granular ability to control, because if an identity is compromised, you have the ability to control that identity, where it's coming from, and put rules around that identity, so that you have almost heuristics or anomaly detection, or rule set that, this identity has to come from this system for this particular application with this hash. Does it get that granular?
It absolutely does. And in fact, I'd actually even go a step further and argue, in most cases, 99.9% of the cases, if that identity is compromised, it's no longer that identity. And so all of a sudden, it no longer has authorization, depending on how. So, for example, hash is a perfect example. That's one of them. We use fuzzy hashes, digital certificates. We use a couple dozen different properties for both executables, CPU IDs and GUIDs IDs, and other OS fingerprinting IDs for system. But if a service, for example, is compromised, in many cases, like, for example, let's say I use Mimikatz and I steal their token out of memory, and I use that on a different process. It's not that the identity of DNS has been compromised. I'm now using a different identity. The token or the password or other means has been compromised. And so in that scenario, if it's not the same identity, it doesn't have the same security rules. It's basically just blocked.
And isn't part of this, too, that identity is now not just one identity at home, that same identity may sort of simultaneously exist in multiple places? And by that I mean that identity is reaching out to different environments and pulling things in and sharing things all the time. So the idea that you're just in this one place and I can sort of put a bubble around you is getting more difficult, because that bubble is spreading across all these different environments.
Exactly. And when you look at it from an identity, it also allows you to do what you were suggesting earlier, which is you can profile, and we do that, in fact, and profile what types of communication, the frequency, the breadth, how many different services is something communicating with. And if you tried to do that with just NetFlow, it would be just a mess, a noise. You'd have terabytes of data, and trying to find anomalies in NetFlow traffic. People have to call it the big data problem in the cloud, but it's actually just a mess. But if you're looking at it from identity, who's talking to whom and how often and where, and how much are they discussing, without even talking about what they're discussing, just their patterns of communication, you can identify anomalous behavior through identity as opposed to through the way they're communicating, which is addresses. That's just the tool. And that changes all the time, especially in hybrid environments. How I might communicate changes.
Dan, I wanted to ask you, in your role now at Zscaler, right? And previously you were part of the Edgewise team, correct? Just
I was, yes,
for our audience,
yes.
Right? And so when you work with customers and they went through this drastic change that was brought upon us by the global pandemic and COVID-19, of course, what were some of the interesting challenges that you've seen your customers go through, and how have you been able to help them?
Yeah, I think probably the one that stands out to me most is that, a lot of these customers had projects in flight, but they got accelerated. So all these remote access projects, all these, lift and shift to cloud projects, they were things that, overnight relatively overnight. They had to say, you know, we have to do this in weeks instead of months. And so, you know, it's really, it forced them to look out into the market and see, you know, what tools are available that can help them accelerate these changes. And that's really the key one that sticks out in my mind.
So you've been really busy in the past few months. In other
Pleasantly
words.
busy, but yes.
That's awesome. That's awesome. But, and you know, we've heard that, and it's awesome to get your perspective on it, right? Because we often hear, well, you know, everyone's projects were accelerated, and you hear that from pundits and people on the outside looking in, but it's nice to get that insider perspective, go, no, like, really, that's what's happening, right? Like, it's not just something that someone's predicting. Like, rubber meets the road. Like, people are doing these projects in the cloud and really need solutions to help them. Because, as we know, if you rush any project, let alone the cloud, that's on the internet, right? I mean, I bet you all of us have been victims of it in some way, shape, form, or fashion in our careers. You rush to put anything out on the internet, and it's going to get owned because you missed something.
That's how you get innies.
Yep. I mean, we call it a honeypot just to make ourselves feel better, but that's really lying. Like,
I was trying to see if you'd fall for this.
Lie.
I'm kind of curious how with everybody kind of rushing and this huge push for, I've seen a huge push for microsegmentation because it does provide that kind of distributed end-to-end protection that would otherwise be very difficult to do with, you know, both VPN scaling and say something like, you know, endpoint protection that's getting rolled out to personal devices. How are you guys seeing customers deploy this very rapidly without making huge gaping holes or mistakes in the microsegmentation project? Or
not just holes, Tyler, right? But like we've all done in our careers, we roll something out, we put security around it, and the security restrictions are too tight, and things don't work.
That too, yeah. Either too tight or too.
Yeah. This is a great intro, actually. Yeah, no, this is a great intro, and we can actually show you. I think we're going to show you today how easy it is to do in the product. But there's sort of two factors when you're dealing with a project, whether it's Active Directory, any sort of critical infrastructure that you're trying to, whether rush or just accomplish in microsegmentation. And the first is identifying what to do, which is a huge problem for most people. If I were to say to you, go to your network now, identify everything that communicates with Active Directory, as the example we're using here, identify how and where everything that communicates with Active Directory needs to is done. First of all, that's a massive project just in and of itself if you don't have a tool that does that for you. And then the second thing is, let's say you're able to do that, and very few are, which is why most microsegmentation projects, they'll focus on some smaller application, and they'll spend literally months defining the rules, which leads to the second problem. Now you're left with thousands and thousands of micro rules that you have to manage. So you get it right, and as you said, Paul, so you get it right, you deploy it, and all of a sudden everything breaks. And so now you end up eventually gravitating to that any scenario.
Right.
And one of the things that's unique to our technology is we're able to do that for you in a matter of hours or in a matter of days for a more comprehensive analysis where we can tell you not only and automatically analyze what is communicating for whatever to give an application service, server, host, environment, take your pick, and then boil that down in almost every single scenario to less than a dozen rules. So now you're left with less than 12 policies that actually enforce Active Directory for your entire network. And that's not like just blowing my horn. That's really important because if you can't do it, if you can't get it down to a small manageable number, you're not going to be able to maintain it when things go wrong.
Right. I mean,
and so,
even
one of the other things. Go ahead.
Even one control can throw you through a loop. And I've seen this in the past, especially 6 months, right? I've tuned all of my containers in all of our different projects that we have and services that we have here at Security Weekly. They do not run as root, right? And I slowly started that like a year or more ago, and now they're not running as root. And what happens is, you know, developers or other things and things get moved around and upgraded. All of a sudden it's like things don't work quite right because still people are assuming that the container is running it as root. And I'm like, get with the program, guys. It's 2020. Containers don't run, but even just that simple, like permission change, it's amazing how it can throw things through a loop and break things and how other things assume that, oh, well, your container must be running as root. And it's like, no, dude, like it's running as a regular privileged user.
Or heaven forbid you get new software or have to change, say, like video conferencing software or have a new...
Now, that never happens.
right? Even least privilege on Windows, right, or any operating system. If you're not running with your permissions open, it's amazing how things break. That's where I think, Harry, having, and Dan, right, having a tool that can help you manage that process and tell you about the exceptions as you go forward is super
And
critical.
I mean, we've all been sitting there where there's a CEO on the phone going,
I need it now.
I want this running, and I want it running in 5 minutes, or just go ahead and go straight on out to your car and leave the building because. And then what do? You go. You
grant the container all the privileges.
It's root, by God.
You granted all the capabilities, so it's not running as root.
It's going to open,
but it has all the capabilities, so it can behave as root, and things work.
Yeah.
And you're like, I passed my security audit, and my CEO's happy. Except next week, you're going to get pwned. Bad.
All CEOs are super users. The only way you have to make them a super user. If they're a CEO or they have a C title, you make them a super user, and they stop complaining. And there's no security implications to that whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. Never has been, never will.
Just create a user called super user that has no privileges and make them that, and they'll be fine. Not that I ever did that, not even once. That I just made a user called super user, and they were like, "Is this what they call the root?" Like, that's called the root. So you're it. We all have to beg you for privileges, and they're like, "Excellent."
I give them a hot link.
I am in charge.
Called God mode.
Yeah, exactly. Same thing.
It's God mode.
Yep. Oh, yeah. G mode, any of those kind of, or just make it something cryptic, like C kernel S user, and go, see, if nobody knows this, but if you're that, you can do anything.
I don't know where we were going with that, but it was fun.
No, it was good. It was fun.
Fun and so true.
So if you want, I think we have a few minutes. I'd love to show you how easy it is.
So
you guys know that I'm not just
absolutely
blowing. So and full disclaimer. So and I brought Dan first of all because he's amazing. And the reason he didn't have a last name is he's really more like Cher. Dan, Cher. It's just a one name thing.
I thought his last name was Super.
Prince. There's a scene, Beyonce. There's a scene in Doctor Strange where he goes through that with Wong. They're really funny. It's very well written. It's pretty funny.
And I also brought him along because, of course, as part of Zscaler, I got my new laptop today, and I don't like giving demos unproven on a laptop I've never used before. So this gives me plausible deniability.
There you go.
Open all the ports; it'll be fine.
Right.
How's God
right? Properly.
Dan, I'd love to. I'll pass it over to Dan and let him show you how easy it is when I say, and just to give a quick little intro to that voiceover. He's going to show, and of course, it's our demonstration environment, but it's been running for several months as Active Directory, as a bunch of servers. But it shows what does it look like in our product when you deploy in terms of visibility, and then how easy it is to identify Active Directory. Say, listen, I want to protect it. Period. Done. And let the process of the intelligence of what we've done automatically create the less than dozen policies and allow you to update them if you want to when changes are deployed.
That sounds great. So let me run through this real quick. So Edgewise console here. I got a demo environment, just like Harry said. Bunch of hosts running here, mixture of Windows, Ubuntu, CentOS, and a smattering of different workloads. But the one thing I definitely do have is an Active Directory domain, and most of my workloads authenticate against it. And so if I jump to inventory real quick, I actually have my host list here. So these are all hosts running the Edgewise agent. So they're connecting back. The Edgewise agent is monitoring connections to and from these hosts, and then sending some metadata to the Edgewise cloud. And it's effectively stitching it together into kind of a directed graph of connectivity. So when Harry was talking about, one of the big challenges of microsegmentation is first understanding the environment, doing that survey process. Edgewise is really doing a lot of that for you. And so great example here. If I just grab one of my AD servers like AD01, go to choose action, map connections, we're actually going to see everything communicating inbound, outbound, and internal to AD01. So the way to interpret this is we got our center column, which is the target column. That's the host I selected an action on. And you can see all the software running on it. You got your standard DNS, LSAS, DFS, RS, et cetera. Left is inbound and right is outbound. And so, like I said, pretty much everything connects. Even Linux servers are authenticating with the LWSMD connector. And if I click on something, we can even get some details about what's communicating directly with LSAS. So again, just really good visibility, really good understanding of what's communicating in the network. So not only does this help the admin, but it also helps provide Edgewise with the data it needs to make intelligent recommendations to really actually take the admin to that next level. How do you go from visibility to that initial policy baseline? So let me jump back to inventory, and I'll walk through that step real quick. So the first thing I want to do is I want to build a host segment, because I don't want to deal with hosts independently. I want to group them together into a segment, some sort of representation of things that communicate in similar patterns. And so I got 2 AD servers. So let me go ahead. I'm going to do a matching expression for the name, AD star. That already filtered it down, but I want to be a little more strict with it. So I'm actually going to say these must be running DFSRS and Active Directory Web Services. I'm going to save that. So this is now what we call a host segment, or a group of hosts, called Active Directory, defined by a query expression that's dynamic. So if I get a new Active Directory server, it's actually going to get pulled in. It's going to match that and get pulled in automatically. Great for auto-scaling groups, VDI, et cetera. In my case, I'm using it for Active Directory. So now I can interact with this directly. I could even map connections just like we did before. Throughout the whole UI, I can now deal with this as an object, which is great. But the key thing we want to do is lock it down. So from inventory, I'm going to kick off a workflow called auto segment. Fancy name for creating a baseline. Literally looking at all the connectivity, understanding what's communicating to create that baseline policy set. The one option I need to choose is, what are my default blocks? So, a firewall has an anchor policy that's a default block, so does Edgewise. Ours are a little bit different because we are a little bit different. We integrate with the OS security framework. So we have an inbound block, outbound block, and internal block. So these are relative to the segment. So you might have a segment of 10 servers, while internal means between those servers, as well as over loopback and link local. Other thing here I just want to point out is I'm going to leave symblock enabled. What this means is it's going to use the full block code path, but instead of blocking connection, it'll actually let it through and log it as a special audit type. So this is perfect if I'm trying out new policy at customer site. I want to build confidence in the system before switching it to a real block. I could also use this as kind of an anomaly detection engine, because really what I'm doing is I'm creating a baseline here. And if it ever goes out of that baseline, it's going to log a symblock, and it's going to be that flag, that notifier to me as an admin that something has happened that was outside the baseline. So let's kick that off. And so like I said, this is looking at connectivity with environments. It's basically using the same thing I showed you in that directed graph view of connections. And it's going to create a couple intermediary objects called app collections, which are just groups of applications. They're more or less filters on top of the host segment, as well as create a couple policies. I think Harry said maybe 9 max. I think we end up with like 6 or 7 for my AD environment. And it should do this in 20 to 30 seconds. So yeah, just a couple more. So that is done now. So we created our policy baseline. I'm going to skip this summary screen and show you the real meat here. Back in a view very similar to what I showed you before with Connection Viewer, but now we're in something called Policy Builder. And so any line between objects represents a policy. Green for allow, red for block, classic. So we got the red around Active Directory, which is my host segment. That means there's the perimeter that I chose. And then we're going to override that with specific allows. And there's different collections, these app collections, based on connectivity class. So with Edgewise, you got the agent on some endpoints. That's called a managed host. There's other endpoints in the network, obviously, that do not have the agent on it. And that's called an unmanaged host. So in our case, the baseline created a policy here from a collection of unmanaged to a collection of managed services running an AD. And in this case, this is an app collection. It's a filtered list. It's nothing more than a filter. But it filtered it down automatically to DNS, LSAS, service host, and system. So instead of saying these addresses can talk to all of this, it's saying these addresses can only talk to DNS, LSAS, service host, and system. And on top of that, it's saying, the identity of these applications. So always anchoring a policy on identity. If DNS, LSAS, anything changes, then it's automatically a new identity. Like Harry was saying, that policy effectively is no longer valid. And that will change the behavior of the Edgewise agent. And so we got the inbound policy here. We got a second inbound, which is effectively a different class, this time managed to managed. We got our internal relative to the segment, so replication between the servers. And then we got 2 outbound. Outbound to global internet, outbound to local RFC 1918 unmanaged addresses. In this case, I'm in AWS, so 169.254, 169.254.80, that's the metadata server. There's a couple things that need to access that. And it's really, frankly, that simple. Once you build a directed graph of the network, you can pump that through, a couple different workflows, a couple different systems, and effectively build a policy baseline for you. There's no reason for you to go do that manually. And so that's what we see here.
So how
So
big
would you
a
say
deal
that's
is
one
it
of
if
the
I decide
biggest-
to add a new service on my AD server?
Sorry, what's that?
Yeah, go ahead.
If I
Lee.
wanted to add another application to the AD cluster, let's say that a new service, let's say it's a password key store or something. I'm just making it
Sure,
up.
sure.
How hard is that?
Oh, it's easy. So basically what I do, instead of having to modify the policy directly, I actually modify the membership of this object. So this app collection, that filter on top of the full set, basically I just modify the filter to also include something else. So I'll jump to
so I just add
inventory.
whatever my thing is called, and they're good to go.
Exactly. So I just need to know, relatively what app collection is here. And, we have a strong naming convention, modify the collection. And if I need to add something that might be, for whatever reason, it might be CCM exec.
Right. Yeah.
Save it.
Okay. Well, that was
and
awful hard.
It is updated.
But it's actually even better than that, as Dan was mentioning, because if in fact we detect another service, let's say, well, in the case of SymBlock, we'll report it, but we'll allow it. In the case of a block, we will block it. But either way, there's an option to go back to the same place where he said segment to say resegment. And it will show you all of the things that were blocked that would be how the memberships would change. And in fact, I think, Dan, you can actually simulate that by removing an application from one of our collections to show them what it might look like.
Yeah, let me kick out a few hosts from one of these particular collections. And so that collection I'm modifying here, it represented kind of the external group that's allowed to talk inbound. And I just removed a few things from it. So now if we go back to my host segments and do what Harry suggested, resegment, it's just a nice simple workflow that validates your protection scheme and then presents to you those paths. So we show the user the path. In this case, it's like service host on desktop 4, the service host on AD01. It's independent of interfaces and ports because Edgewise really doesn't care about that. We'll adjust based on whether something's using, public interface, loopback, link local, it doesn't matter. But all I need to do as an admin is select those paths and say, you know what? I want to auto assign them, basically run it through the same algorithm as the first workflow I did, that baseline workflow, and then just commit that.
How heavy of a client is this to run on those servers? Does it take a ton of resources? Is it a light footprint?
That's a fantastic question. Yeah, a lot of people think it's really heavyweight, but the nice thing is by integrating with the OS security framework, WFP or LSM, we can actually hook into just 6 different system calls, and we don't need to force our way in. It's just a pluggable architecture. We can hook into 6 different system calls. I think it's like open exec bind, socket listen, one more. And effectively what we do is
you guys are hooking directly into those syscalls for essentially managing those process visibility, the port bindings, all of the pipes.
Well, all we need to do is hook in through that security framework so we get a callback so we can make an enforcement decision when that app says, hey, I need network resources. I need to open a socket. We get a callback and we can say yes or no. It's as simple as that. But after it takes place, we get out of the way because we're not doing packet inspection. We're not doing DPI SSL. So we don't need to scale relative to throughput, relative to packet count. We're just there for, the connection.
So
that's pretty slick.
So I'm wondering because as I recall, you're using a lot of cryptographic verification of the components that are talking on each side. What's applying the patches from Super Tuesday look like?
Yes, also a great question. Yeah,
we set up representative nodes.
Sorry, what was that?
Go ahead.
Oh yeah. So basically, what we do is we take to set the stage. You have an old version. Let's say it was DNS. You have an old version. Mm-hmm. And it has a certain identity, certain SHA-256, P headers, signatures, process name, etc. New version comes online, and what the agent does is it compares the two identities, and it says, okay, you know what? signature is still both Microsoft. P header is pretty similar. SHA-256 clearly different. And then it runs what's called a locality sensitive hash, which is a way of calculating a difference vector between two binaries, and says, oh, you know what? Enough of these things match to build decent confidence in it, but then I ran an LSH and they're 99% similar. They're the same thing. I'm going to collapse them down. The admin doesn't need to do anything. That new app inherits the policy.
And just to further that, in fact, as a safeguard, we run all of our information across about 36 different scanning engines. So if, in fact, it were a malicious version of DNS or whatever it was that was changing, we would not include it, even if it was highly similar to the legitimate one.
So what about at the other end, where you're like, okay, it's been, whatever interval, and I think everything that's not patched can't play anymore. Can I disallow the old version? Or is that crazy?
You absolutely can. You can actually, so you can create blocks. Yeah, you can do blocks and you can do allows. We will allow it automatically. I think we automatically age out older versions. I forget the actual logic behind it, but obviously after a few years of running and you have 20 versions of DNS in our system, but you only have 3 active versions, we will automatically age out older versions. But if you absolutely want to take a specific version and, if you will, blacklist it, you can do that. And in fact, you can also do that the way you do that without creating, let's say, for example, let's say you don't want to do lots of policies. The whole key here is few policies. You have one policy, and the policy is called "My blacklisted apps can't communicate," period. And you would add this to that, as Dan was showing earlier, this very dynamic way. You can either do dynamic or absolute ways to define a collection. So you just, as you have either known bad things, in a sense, that's what we're doing with known bad files, but you could do it for known obsolete, vulnerable, or, deprecated files. You simply add it to your quote unquote blacklist collection, and the blacklist policy takes effect and will override any allow policies.
Sweet. It sure sounds like you do deny all first, and then what's allowed is allowed.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm interested as I'm listening to the discussion, which is awesome. When you do things like process injection on Windows is pretty popular. When you're trying to execute things that are wrapped in other things, a portable executable with Python code. Like how does the Edgewise product protect against things like that as those subtle changes are happening to processes and applications?
So are we talking about, for example, were you talking about, like, for example, jar and Python files in specific, where they don't have just a process executable, but they also have loaded code component?
Correct.
For us, that's part of the signature. That's part of the signature. So a jar file, for example, even though the process is java.exe, the jar is part of our fingerprint.
Gotcha. So even though there might be other code embedded in there, or even with a regular Windows portable executable and there's another language executing in there, you're able to detect that, right? Because it's part of the signature.
Correct.
Can I pull like a big audit drop out of this product then? So like one of the problems that I used to run into all the time was we were trying to audit Active Directory. There were so many things in there, so many permissions, so many cross permissions and so forth. And I was always trying to find products that would help me pull out just a report I could go through and get through it and say, okay, these are the critical accounts. I want to highlight them. I need to go test those.
What you can pull out of them, and the whole system is, there is an API that allows you to pull out all of our auditing and inventory and visibility data that you can pull into a SIM, you can pull into other systems. What we don't do, but by the way, this is something that one of the Zscaler products does do, the ZPA product is, or I think it's the ZIA product rather, which will do a configuration audit. If what you're talking about is, can you audit like the configuration settings of Active Directory? We don't do that, but part of the Zscaler family does do that. We do audit all of the actual connectivity and show you what is actually connecting or attempting to connect. And
that's kind of what I meant, because that was the harder thing to find. What does this picture look like? And it's really, really complicated picture when you start thinking about it, and it's very difficult for somebody to say, is this safe? and you go, I don't even know what all it's talking to. I mean, there's so many different pieces going in all directions. And as you add the hybrid and you add the cloud, those pieces may be scattered across multiple platforms, and it's really tough to try to even begin to explain that to someone.
Yeah, when you get to something like an infrastructure service, without doubt, but we see that with customers, even with their small test apps where they have, 7 microservices working in a container, and the developers think, oh yeah, they show you their whiteboard and their flowchart. This is how the microservices communicate. But in fact, then when it gets deployed, the amount of supporting services and actual connectivity that are going on is way beyond what any of the engineers actually thought.
Correct.
And this allows you that visibility, even when it's a simple application.
Yep. That's nice.
As engineers in general, whether it's software, networks, cloud, you have an idea that you think you know how stuff works, and until you get a map and you're like, oh wait, that's not what I mean. I looked at code today that I wrote a year ago. I was like, oh, I did that thing. I called that function twice, and I really only need to call it once. And I'm like, I should have picked that up the first time, and I didn't think it was working that way. Like that stuff happens all the time in engineering, in computers, all the time. So it's nice to have.
Which is why you should never look at your code that you wrote yesterday. Write code and look at and forget it. Never look at it again.
I've had to go back. I looked at. You ever had this like horrifying moment where you look at code you wrote a year ago, and you're like, you have this like mix of emotions. It's like, you're horrified that you wrote code. You're amazed that it still works, but you're also kind of excited because in the last year you've learned how to do it better, right? It's like this flood of emotions, right? I think we all have as engineers in any capacity when we go back and look at previous projects, right?
No, I look back at old code. You're talking about my 1, 2, 3 macros, and some of it you're horrified by, but some of it you look back and you go, "Wow, I did this before there was, C++ templates or these other macros. I was doing this beforehand. This is kind of cool, even if it is ridiculously hacky."
Yep. Absolutely.
Then you have that moment. Why is it still running 10 years later?
Yeah, like how is it still working? Like how did this work for so long without anyone finding this bug? I don't understand.
My response was, "You're still using this?" Yeah. Because I got a call. I've told that before, but I got a call in like 97 from a company I wrote this payroll thing for in 1977. And they asked me if it was
the year I was born, Doug.
Well, they asked me if it was Y2K compliant. And he was like, "Is this Y2K compliant?" I was like, "I don't know. I was 14 years old. I didn't, I thought the year 2000 we'd all be flying cars and talking robots." And, he was like,
sneakers that automatically cinch to our feet when we put them on.
Yeah, exactly.
But and my damn hoverboard.
They're still running it. Drop those cards. I'm like, if it still works. But it was not Y2K compliant.
I bet not.
No, it's called job security.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Any other questions for Harry and Dan? On that note?
So you talked about unmanaged or non-participating nodes real quickly, and I was thinking you guys didn't, in terms of your client support, didn't list the Mac. So if I've got a whole bunch of Macs that are AD bound, what would that look like? And can I still manage their behavior a bit?
It's a good question. So we don't have a Mac agent today. And so today they would look like the same as for us today, at least, they would look the same as your printer or some other device where we can't be deployed. So you could manage the other half of the equation, but to us, the only thing that we can manage from the other side, it would be an address. And it would be the typical TCP IP information in the tuples. Until such time at which we have them. Our focus is primarily on data centers, on cloud environments. We don't have a lot of Macs in that environment, but we are getting more and more, as Dan mentioned, this push to enable remote workers to connect in securely into their cloud environments. We can be deployed in that, but that's also where you start getting into, which is why the acquisition and sort of the merger with the Zscaler family has been, really such a great marriage for us, because that's where products like Zscaler ZPA come in play. And you use a ZPA client. They're specifically designed for remote users on Macs, PCs, take your pick, to dial into cloud environments, where our primary focus is on securing the intra-communications within those environments themselves.
Okay. So another thing that was crossing my mind is years ago, we had a conversation about a read-only AD directory node because it was secure. And I know that, I hear the oxymoron, I get it, but it sounds like we could actually put a full-on node
wherever the hell and have it be secure. Am I jumping too far?
That is, of course, the intent is that you should be able to. It's the same thing with, look, our dream is you should be able, once you're securing an environment with rules like Edgewise, you don't need to have firewalls in place with, traditional firewalls, because we are in fact securing the environment, only allowing authorized software and services to communicate in. A read-only Active Directory, sure, that gives you some advantage, but it doesn't give you the advantages Paul was talking about in the beginning. It's still a phone book of everything. Right. It still allows a malicious service to question and query everything in your environment, and they're going to find some other node that nobody actually really cares about the Active Directory. It's a means to get to somewhere else. You're still getting all that information.
Yeah, read-only doesn't do anything to the attacker other than allow us to not make an account, which, if you're good, you're not going to be doing anyway, right?
Right.
Yeah. Right. Well, and in fact, even in read-only, you're eventually going to find an account that has the modifier privilege.
Right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Yeah, it can't be read-only for everyone, because then you wouldn't be able to use it.
Read-only is just an illusion anyway. It's like that super user account we were talking about. It's just,
It's smoke and mirrors. Yeah. But I, for real, had a conversation about it. I was like, really? I mean, come on.
Root giveth and root taketh away.
I mean, there are...
like that. What is the other unicorn? What do they call that? Sneaker nets, where basically a completely isolated network. It doesn't exist anymore.
No, but I mean, we used to play tricks like that with websites. More recently, right, you take WordPress, you make all your changes, and then those changes get pushed to a read-only site that's exposed to the internet. Back in the day, we would write the website, and then we would store it on CD, and the website would be served from CD, so no one could access it, right? But those things aren't practical, especially today, where everything is ephemeral, right? It's just not practical today.
Hello, sexy people.
Hey, Joff.
Aren't running their services off of CDs anymore?
Well, see, in the 90s when we were taught, you could, because performance-wise, no one would know the difference, right? Because everyone had dial-up modems. It didn't matter.
Like, wow, this thing's moving, right?
Nowadays,
I mean, Jeff's not
has
here.
3 buckets.
Yeah.
So Jeff's not here. I'm curious, since Jeff's not here, I got to fill in for him. And from a microsegmentation standpoint, what does this address from a compliance kind of angle? Are you tackling multiple avenues with microsegmentation?
Tyler, are you asking about PCI? Are you asking the Jeff PCI question?
I tried to bring myself to say, from PCI, what does this apply to? But I just couldn't do it. I'm sorry, Jeff. I tried.
Dan, you want to take a stab at this?
Yeah. So we actually worked with a prospect briefly with this problem. They had gotten to the point where they had 2 workstations on each desk, one that was PCI compliant, one that could do standard hotel booking or whatever it might be. And so the nice thing about microsegmentation, particularly when it's app centric or in our way, identity focused, you can actually run those applications side by side on the same system and have them segmented. Since it's anchored on the identity application, it's okay that it's using the same interface, the same system. They are separate.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
So so you can actually get what they call those, the QSAs, to validate that we can actually create an environment that is PCI compliant, even if they're not physically separated, which is kind of sort of the poor man's way that people have been doing it.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting. I had actually a PCI thing I was working on. I had the same question. I'm like, so PCI says segmentation, but what does that mean today, right? Is that like Windows Firewall? Is that VLAN? Is that physical? There's a lot of ways that I can segment. Is it like Edgewise technology?
Right.
I would also classify absolutely as a form of segmentation. And like you said, Harry, you have to work with your auditor and get them to review, I think, your configuration and kind of bless it.
It's whatever you can get the auditor to buy into.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Right. Yeah. And there's no question, by the way, that the QSAs and the PCI with compliance, they do take longer to sort of move. I remember the days, for example, when I was back in Carbon Black, when we were dealing with systems that were like gas stations or point of sale systems. They had to be PCI compliant, but they also had to be updated with the latest antivirus, which basically means they had to be open to the internet, which kind of defeated the point of the security. And it took a long time to work with the auditors to get them to realize, you know what, there are better ways to do this that don't require opening up access to the internet to secure the system and still meet, Reg 5 or whatever it was at the time.
Well, outstanding. Harry and Dan, thank you so much for appearing on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. As always, people can go to securityweekly.com/Edgewise and learn more and get a free workload visibility, a free month of workload visibility. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thanks for having us. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks for having us.
With that, we'll take a short break and come back with the security news. Stay tuned.